current production of Mom, How Did You Meet the Beatles by Adrienne Kennedy and Adam Kennedy. Each of our sessions are designed to offer a deeper dive into the play as well as the themes and cultural legacies surrounding it. For tonight's discussion, Adrienne Kennedy and Black Women Playwrights, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing my co-panelists for this evening, Doctors Sandra Adell and Dr. Donna Forsgren. Before I introduce the panelists more formally, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Khalid Y. Long, and I am the production dramaturg for Mom, How Did You Meet the Beatles, directed by Baron Kelly. And in addition to my responsibilities at Forward Theater, I'm also an assistant professor at Columbia College, Chicago. With us tonight, we have Dr. Sandra Adell, who is a professor in the Afro-American Studies Department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She has written and edited 5 books, including Literary Masters, Toni Morrison, Double Consciousness, Double Consciousness, Double Bind, Theoretical Issues in 20th Century Black Literature, and Contemporary Plays by African American Women, 10 Complete Works. A native of Detroit, Michigan, and currently residing in Madison, Wisconsin, Dr. Adell is also an actor and a commercial print model. Next, we have Dr. LaDonna L. Forsgren, who is an associate professor in the Department of Film, Television, and Theater, and concurrent faculty in Gender Studies program at the University of Notre Dame. LaDonna has published widely in a number of scholarly journals and edited collections, primarily focusing on the Black arts movement. Her first book, In Search of Our Warrior Mothers, Women Dramatists of the Black Arts Movement, investigates the works and careers of Marty Evans Charles, J.E. Franklin, and Sonia Sanchez. And LaDonna's second book, Sisters in the Struggle, An Oral History of the Black Arts Movement, explores the contributions of Black women intellectuals to the Black arts movement. As we jump into our discussion, I just want to send a reminder out to our viewers that we will be taking questions from the audience, so please begin to submit your questions as the conversation moves forward. So thank you both for being here tonight. And I want to begin with a question. Let's just jump right into our conversation. You both have written extensively on Black women playwrights. And I certainly want us to talk a little bit about your individual works and projects this evening, and we'll certainly get into that. But I want to start off by asking you both to share how you came to study, teach, and write about Black women playwrights.
Well, I started because I couldn't find any work, much work by Black women playwrights, period. And I was very interested in who were the women playwrights and theater directors early on. And so I looked at work with, for example, founding artistic directors of theater companies as far back as the 1920s, starting with Anita Bush and then moving forward with other directors, designers, and so forth. That was one of my interests, because the other part of it was that the playwrights, they were few and far between. I mean, you had a handful. We all know Lorraine Hansberry, Ntozake Shange. But what's exciting for me now is to see, to dig around and find more work. And so I was looking at anthologies, because I was looking for collections of plays. There were, a few studies of plays by women playwrights, but not many collections. So that was one of the reasons I put together the anthology. But my interest has expanded, particularly and one reason it's expanded so much is my involvement with the Black Theater Network, because you've got the playwrights, you've got the designers, you've got the directors, you've got everybody there, a group there. And so what I was trying to do as LaDonna, I mean, her archival work is incredible, but what I was trying to do was dig up not just the playwrights, but also the designers and the directors and founding artistic directors. And it's just been, to tell you quite honestly, I'm quite astonished and excited, but a bit, cautious about what's happening even today as we speak and as we sit here, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 plays by Black women going up on Broadway this season. So it's, this is fertile ground. Ground. So it's just been an ongoing interest and concern for me, and it's very exciting.
Right. LaDonna, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
I think a very similar situation. I guess for me, I've always had a deep appreciation for Black women's culture, being raised by a single mom and having 9 sisters around me. I thought Black women could do anything, do anything. If something was broke, you went and you fixed it. There were not any limitations in terms of what we could do. My mom always encouraged us to go to college. That was her dream that she had. She was never able to achieve that goal. So it became our goal to do that and to make it happen. And then during undergrad, of course, you mentioned Lorraine Hansberry, A Raisin in the Sun. We read that in class, and that was my first introduction to Black theater, my first and only in 4 years. And so I began being interested in theater as a performer. And I didn't even know that there was a thing called Black theater, because Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun was not put into any historical context. No idea that Black women are still writing, and that they wrote well before Lorraine Hansberry, and they continue to write. And so for me, knowing, just having that thirst, that desire to reclaim and to recover Black women's works, so important. And I think the point that you made, Professor Adell, about accessibility to their works, that's an ongoing issue and an ongoing concern. And so that needs to be a part of the discussion, is publishing their works as well.
And I want to say also that, I have been teaching the Black Arts Movement for a long time. I always switch things up. This semester, it's all about theater. And they, I was looking for people who, were, where were the women in the Black Arts Movement? And of course, one name came up. And whose name was that?
Sonia Sanchez?
No, Barbara Antier. In terms of the founding, again, I'm looking for artistic directors, and you've done an excellent job, building on that, because we only had one book, one study, and that was Deanna Thomas's work. And LaDonna, I am so happy, I am so pleased that you have picked up the mantle and you have filled in this major gap, not only with the first book, but with the collection of interviews that you've done. This is like. It really is a big chunk in terms of the development of Black women's theater history. So thank you so much for your tireless work on this. Congratulations too.
I think it's women like you who laid the foundation. Just need to say that. Without you, I wouldn't be here.
You both actually have done great archival work. So LaDonna, you have written about the Black Arts Movement, in particular the women who shaped the movement. And Professor Adell, you have done something similar, right? Your work, you talk about, Ellen Stewart and La Mama. You also talk about Anita Bush. You're a women pioneers who typically we say have shaped the road for Black women in the arts, or have shaped the road for Black women in theater more specifically. But I think both of your work collectively really speaks to the ways in which Black women have shaped American theater generally.
Absolutely.
Right? There are some of these institutions and some of the other sort of pioneers to follow in their footsteps would not. It's hard to think of their works and their contributions existing without some of the groundwork laid by those particular artists in which both of your scholarships take up, and more specifically, both of your works look at, the early part of the 20th century. And so with that, I want us to turn just a little bit to Adrienne Kennedy more specifically.
Yes.
So we know that Adrienne Kennedy wrote Mom, How Did You Meet the Beatles in 2008, right? So a later play with her son, Adam Kennedy. And the play takes, a close glimpse at a major period of her life during the 1960s, before she had become, the major playwright that we know today. In fact, during the time in which the play takes place, she was still being wrapped in what I consider to be this celebratory cocoon, because of her play Funny House of a Negro, which first was produced off Broadway in 1964, in which she won an Obie Award. I want to make sure we name that, right? So Adrienne Kennedy's career stretches over 5 decades. And her most recent play was He Brought Her Back in a Box in 2018. And so I want to ask you both, from your own perspectives, why is Adrienne Kennedy such an important playwright?
She's important to me. Just to make that very clear. Because she has, from the very beginning, begin to break the stronghold that realism has on theater, on Black theater and Black women's theater, and that's important because it opens up for the space for experimentation in form. Now the problem is, and this is a problem, that she actually is not that well known outside of certain theater
Mhm.
circles, and she's also very hard to teach. I want us to talk about that a little bit,
Yes.
because of the way she weaves all of this autobiographical work into these narratives, and then it's not realism. and
Right.
and for example, with Funny House of a Negro, there's stuff in there I have to remind the students, no, no, her father didn't really rape her mother. Okay,
Right.
these are dreamscapes, but the importance for her today, especially for the writers who are looking for new forms, new ways of presenting these stories, is precisely that she was consistent in writing the short play. She doesn't write big plays, and really experimenting with form and not caring about, look, I know I need to have an audience, but this is not realism. The most realistic thing that she has done is the show that she, this mom, the title, Mom, How Did You Meet the Beatles?
Right.
Because it's really
Right.
a monologue,
Right. Right.
and so, and we can talk about structure, the issues about staging her work. But I think that and that's why she is important to me,
Right.
because it's like, here is somebody coming out of the 1960s where everything is supposed to be figurative, you can't be too abstract. But Baraka, even as he was preaching all of this early on, if you look at Amiri Baraka's poetry and his plays, I mean, that's not realism. Most of it is not.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so she fits into that category, but I don't think she's taught enough,
Right. Right. I would
or
agree.
and presented enough,
I would agree. I would agree.
LaDonna.
Completely agree. That was one of the first things that I was going to say, is that these poetic works really depart from realism, and anytime there is a departure, I don't know if it's specific to African American theater, but there's sometimes pushback to that, and so she's experimenting. And for me, I find her work so amazing in the sense that it created space for more Black women's voices to emerge within and outside of the Black arts movement.
Yeah.
And I feel that plays like Funny House of a Negro, in particular, they explore Black women's subjectivity and what it means to be a Black woman in America at that time. And this conversation was necessary, and it was long overdue. She's not the first to do it, but she's doing it in a very unique and compelling way. And she's also talking about having Black and white ancestry and what that means in America.
Right.
And for me personally, since we're bringing in the personal, and I love that, what really appealed to me when I first encountered Adrienne Kennedy is in Funny House of a Negro, is the conversation that she was having about Black women's hair politics.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that was so important. And I mentioned growing up in this household with 9 siblings, we all had very different hair textures.
Right.
It was a spectrum. And always feeling that somehow I wasn't beautiful because I did not fit into that box of a Eurocentric way of defining beauty was very hurtful. And so in reading that play, I could connect with that. It really resonated with me in a very real way, as well as the devastation that's brought out by subscribing to those ideas, those ideals. So for me, that's why she's so important and so necessary. And just her experimentation, I think, laid the groundwork for other dramatists that would come slightly after her, like Sonia Sanchez and her play Sister Sunji, which to me, those 2 plays mirror each other, and they are very difficult to teach. So I completely agree.
Yeah.
But she's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
A phenomenal playwright.
I was thinking back on, you may know, I had a conversation with Adam Kennedy last week, Adrienne Kennedy's son, and co-author of Mom, How Did You Meet the Beatles? And it was a wonderful conversation. And during that discussion, he said, well, how did you come to my mother's work and so forth? And I said to him, I said, so I went to an HBCU, I went to Cheyney University, and I was a theater major, and my concentration was Black drama. And I know you both are probably familiar with this text. There's the Black Theater USA Anthologies, the collections.
Oh yeah.
And Sandra, you were talking about this earlier, but before we got like some of the wealth of published works
that
exist today, the Black Theater USA, those anthologies really what we went to, right? Especially in undergrad. That was it. Right? Because it was the collection. It was like one of the only collections to exist that offer a plethora of literature from the beginning in terms of the establishment of Black drama in America
Right.
to, the early 1990s. Right? I think it like ended with like perhaps one of the earliest August Wilson plays, maybe.
No, I think the latest play would be
Colored
um,
Museum.
the Colored Museum is in it, yeah. And
Yeah.
then among women, it's why is this the Mojo and the Say So?
Yes. Yeah. Is that
Yeah,
Aisha Rahman, I think?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you have the Colored Museum, all
Yes.
right?
Right.
Yeah, and then
Right.
a couple of pieces that are and the excerpts from Shangi, of course, Shangi's in
Right.
it. But
Right.
that was it,
That
and
was
it was
it.
like, okay, we need to. And then we had Sidney Mahomes' work, the
Right.
collection of
The
plays.
Moon Marked and Touched by the Sun, I think.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
and that was it. It's like, okay, we gotta have another anthology. And
Right.
I do want to say that this anthology that I put out of 10 plays by 10 Black African American women, 10 complete plays. Uh, the women were so generous.
Yes.
It's like, and the first play I got was Stick Fly from Lydia Diamond, and it was like, oh sure, I mean, think about this. They're turning over their scripts to me,
Right.
and most of them had not been published, and there's
Right.
a trust that goes along. You're
Right.
laughing. The trust that goes along with that.
Exactly. Right.
you know
Right.
and so there was a tremendous pleasure that I got out of just talking with these women, meeting with them. And in that anthology, because one of the questions you asked me had to do with influences that Adrienne
Right.
Kennedy might have on some of these other playwrights. I never really asked them,
Right. Right.
what impact she had on them, but you can see it
Right.
in some of the
Right.
works. For example, in Lydia Diamond's Voyeur de Venus,
Right.
and it's certainly in a work that's not in my anthology. Susan Laurie Parks acknowledges that in her
Yes.
interviews, the
Yes.
direct contact, connection. But there's some other things in that work where you see that the playwrights are struggling to, or moving away and experimenting more with the form. And I think that what she did back in 1964 took a long time, but she opened up that possibility. But
Yes.
more than anything was that she was so insistent about her aesthetic. This is it. This
Yes.
is the way I write, and I
Yes.
write short plays,
Yes.
and y'all
Yes.
can take it or leave it.
Yes. And that kind of fragmented writing, it really is in most of her writing, even outside of
It
the
is.
plays. I think about her texts, People Who Led to My Plays and so forth. It's very
Absolutely.
much in that fragmented, form, right? Really sort of developing her own formula. I think what's really interesting is that, like, as I was saying, so in that Black Theater USA text, Adrienne Kennedy's Funny House of a Negro is there. And that was my introduction to Adrienne Kennedy. And at that time, as an undergrad, 17, 18 years old on campus, I didn't know what was going on, right? Like deeply as I do now. But I knew that this person, she must be important because she's in this text. She made it. And then, you get to learn more about her through the years, in terms of my own education in theater and so forth. What I learned from Dr. Paul Jackson, who was an early pioneering scholar to center Kennedy's work within the academy,
Right.
to really bring forth that critical scholarship. He was editor of the text Intersecting Boundaries, the Theater of Adrienne Kennedy. I remember he was my advisor and mentor in graduate school, and I remember he made a comment about Adrienne Kennedy's plays written not simply in terms of the fragmented formula, but also you mentioned this earlier, Professor Adell, the length of the play, right? These one act. And he made this argument that in many ways, this was her own sort of Black feminist intervention into theater because she refused to follow the, full play, one act, two act, three act formula that many of her contemporaries in mainstream American theater were doing at that time. Including African American playwrights, right? Think about Lorraine Hansberry, very lengthy play. Many of her plays are very long. Adrienne Kennedy, and he says, one could argue this is a Black feminist intervention in theater because she refused to follow that formula. And in all of her plays, some of them may not necessarily be as the word I'm thinking about is, as potent. I'll find another word later, right?
Yeah.
But as noticeable, I'll just say as noticeable. But all of her plays center women protagonists, women characters.
Yes.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love
Yes. And so as we're talking here, I want to jump to LaDonna really quickly, and I want to ask you to talk a little bit about your work. Adrienne Kennedy, undoubtedly, she's a pioneer of the Black arts movement of the 1960s and 1970s. And we know that your work, LaDonna, directly addresses the gaps that at one time were unfilled as it relates to other Black women theater artists of the time. And so can you share with us a little bit about your work and why it's important that we remember these Black women of the 1960s and 1970s, who I would consider to be Adrienne Kennedy's contemporaries?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that is always interesting is that when I first began doing research on the Black arts movement, I often read articles that said that Kennedy was not a part of the Black arts movement, of what she was doing. And I think it's scholars who, and they look to the past and try to put people in neat little boxes. And if you don't meet the boxes, then you're not included in this narrative. And she's someone that doesn't always meet the boxes. And she's someone who had a definite idea of who she was, right, as we've mentioned. And so for me, the Black arts movement, James Smethurst, he's this wonderful historian. He's one of the people who says, think of the Black arts movement as this conversation. It's an ongoing conversation. Sometimes the voices are louder than others. Sometimes the voices overlap. Sometimes we can't hear all of the voices, but they're there. And so I like to think of the Black arts movement like that, where you have this conversation. People are asking questions about the Black aesthetic. First of all, they're saying there is a Black aesthetic. Right. It does exist. And prior to this moment, you have people still having this conversation in academia, pretty much racist people, right? We're saying there is no, Black people don't have a culture. They come from nothing, essentially. And they're saying, no, right? Black people, we have a culture, it exists, and it's beautiful, and we're gonna foster the Black aesthetic. But then we get to this point where there are at times artists, perhaps the louder voices, I won't name names, the louder voices are saying, no, this is what the Black aesthetic looks like, right? They're trying to compartmentalize what it is. And Kennedy is someone who's saying, yes, and so I mostly look at Black women who are also engaged in those conversations. And there are some elements of the Black arts movement that their ethos that they're saying, yes, there is a Black aesthetic, it does exist, we need to foster this, but they're also saying, but let's look at it from a Black woman's perspective. We're talking about liberation in terms of liberating Black men, but does that really liberate us all? Like Sonia Sanchez literally has a play called but how do it free us? Yeah. Black women are always asking these questions. And at times they ask these questions and they're embraced. Other times, not so much, right? You get people later on like Ndizaki Shange, who said in an interview with Kelly Jones, I'm a daughter of the Black arts movement, even though they didn't know they were going to have a girl, right? And so even she herself, I interviewed her before she passed, and I asked her, like, where would you put yourself in the Black arts movement? Would you consider yourself an insider, an outsider? How would you position yourself? And she looked at me and said, that's a really good question. I do not know. I do not know. But she said, definitely I'm in dialogue with them and I'm having these conversations. But she also wasn't aware of Black women's rich cultural tradition and playwriting tradition. Right. There were playwrights that she was not aware of that existed. And that's lack of just the way we are taught about our history and our culture. Right? We don't always know our own history and our own culture, and we know why that exists. It's perpetuating institutional white racism, essentially, right? So my work really recovers these women, and you can see that there's this rich history of Black women speaking truth to power. It has always happened, and it will continue to happen.
Right. Thank you. And I want to acknowledge also, we've mentioned a lot of playwrights and women theater artists and theater makers, producers and directors here. But, the legacy of Black women playwrights extends, many years, before Lorraine Hansberry's award-winning play 1959, A Raisin in the Sun. Alice Childress, I think it's 1955 off-Broadway production of
Trouble in Mind.
Trouble in Mind. I always get confused with Wine in the Wilderness.
Yeah.
And Ntozake Shange in the late 1960s, 1970s. We think about them, especially within the context of academia. And Sandy, you were mentioning this earlier, right? Like in the ways in which the folks who we teach and who we're not teaching. And I know, like in my own classes, in my American drama courses, and as well as my Afro-American theater classes, I always put on the syllabus plays by Black women, as early as
1917, Rachel?
Rachel, Angelina Well Grimke,
Yeah,
Rachel
yeah,
Evans,
yeah, yeah,
teaching
yeah,
Lexi.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Think about those Black women who have been writing plays and publishing, and not just simply writing plays, but also establishing the field of American drama early on, and that rich legacy, that rich genealogy. Yeah.
And
So if
social
you look, oh, go ahead,
Oh, I was
Ladera.
just going to say, and social justice has always been a part of the
Yes.
conversation. They've
Absolutely.
always been engaged in that.
Yes.
Yeah. But if you take a look at the development of Black theater, period. I mean, the first phase was, again, I go back to Nita Bush and these early founding directors, because the focus early on was on actors.
Yes.
We needed actors, and the actors needed, opportunities to develop and so forth. And then you move into around the 1917, and with the development of Crisis Magazine, the playwriting contests that happened.
Mhm.
That's what began to encourage writing, and a lot of these plays were quite bad, because they had to learn how were they going to learn.
Right.
And so you get Angelina Welt Grimke, winning that prize, and we look at that as, because it was a full, a fully developed play. And then there are the what's called the lynching plays. Caritha
Yes.
Mitchell has a collection of lynching plays, and all of these plays, the playwrights now were strongly didactic, because they were committed. Their plays had to speak to the issues of
Right.
racism, lynching, and so forth. It took a long time for them to begin to find their own voices, and by that I mean where they can begin to explore some of these issues that happen internally. This is another important thing about it, Adrienne Kennedy, because she's looking inside.
Yeah.
And that's also risky for that period,
Yeah.
looking
Yeah.
at and bringing out these the internalized racism that so many of us experienced and still continue to experience, at a time when folks are saying, hey, wait a minute, we don't want white folks to be seeing all of this stuff. We don't need them to see this,
Right.
because we got this other battle to fight.
Right.
We don't need to see these plays where you put Black men as rapists in it, because folks think that's real. I mean, and that's going to undermine our biggest challenge, which is to fight against racism. And then we get way up in here into the 80s, and I mean, with Ellen Stewart, for example, and she's never considered part of the black arts movement. She was just doing her thing.
Right.
She is like theater, y'all got
Right.
some space, come on up here and do a play.
Right.
But then
Right.
we got the producer, right?
Right.
She's a producer. And with Barbara Ann Tier, and there's a whole lot of history, as LaDonna has shown, with Barbara Ann Tier and her relationship with the folks on the Black Arts movement. It's like, I'm doing a different kind of thing here.
Right.
That process, a more process oriented. This is the liberation of the mind and all that kind of stuff. That was as important, even more so, than production. So you got some of these issues. Now we're up into this part of the in the 21st century, where again, some of the playwrights, a few of the playwrights, are just really experimenting and putting all kinds of different things on the stage that the form of realism will not allow.
Yes.
But think about Venus, for example. Susan Laurie Parks's Venus. That story of Venus is really hard, period, right? Of Sachi Bartman. She puts it in a circus. Now, however you like it, whether you like it or not, it also speaks to the 19th century British fascination with freak shows. So the perfect place for it was that whole circus atmosphere. I have not seen that play, and I wish I had seen Signature Theater's production of it, because if you go back, they have a backstage, where they do their backstage design thing. When you go back to see all the work that went into putting this stuff
Yeah.
together, because that's the other thing that I want students to look at. When we're reading the play, it's thematic. We're reading themes. We're trying to, decipher some of the themes that are in these plays, like Susan Laurie Parks's, like Adrienne Kennedy. That's really hard. But then I asked them, imagine, how would you stage this? How do you imagine the space? Then it gets real interesting, right? And those are some of the other things that have helped to keep us, to keep to keep the theater alive, not only alive, but pushing the boundaries even more. Now, it doesn't always sit well, as you know, with audiences.
Right. Right.
That's another thing
Right.
to consider.
I want to go back to something you said. I was thinking about Adrienne Kennedy in all of her plays, in terms of limited sets, and the costumes, limited design, I should say, very minimalist design elements. But while minimalist in terms of what's called for in the script, very much visual heavy to some degree. And I think she was really ahead of her time. So some of the design elements that are possible today, I think, is what Adrienne Kennedy perhaps was thinking about when she was writing her plays as early as the early to mid 1960s. So always sort of this forward-thinking playwright. I also want to mention, just throw a couple of things out there as I'm thinking about her. When I was talking with her son Adam Kennedy last week, he made a comment, and it sat with me for a while. And he said, my mom, she doesn't like to be called a Black woman playwright or Black playwright. She just wants to be called a playwright. And that goes back to, I think it might have been you, Donna, who talks about the ways in which people are put into these categories and boxes. Now, of course, as academics, as scholars, as teachers, we recognize the lineage in which they emerge. So that's why we utilize certain terms and things. But Adrienne Kennedy, like several things. First is like her work. I think Adrienne Kennedy, and I would also put Lorraine Hansberry in this group. They were some of the first Black women to really put Africa or the African diaspora on the stage.
That's right.
Like literally in their work. So you think about Lorraine Hansberry with Assegai in A Raisin in the Sun.
Right.
You think about her play Les Blancs, right? You also think about Adrienne Kennedy with Funny House, right?
Right.
The Moon, right? The diaspora.
Right.
All this. What is that? And then also haunting, going back to, or sort of this haunting presence, I would say, in Adrienne Kennedy's work with regards to colonialism. Like, Adrienne and Lorraine being the first to really say colonialism as a direct link to the American slave trade, which is a direct link to the very things we are addressing in our plays. But with that being said, I think back to what Adrienne Kennedy's son said, Adam Kennedy, when he says, my mom, she doesn't like these categories and labels. But 1960s, Adrienne is like in the office with Joseph Papp.
Yeah.
Right? She's with, Edward Albee, her friend and mentor. So like early on, her connection with these folks outside of, the Black, group at that time, it's also like really pioneering work. And I would argue that's part of her pushing the doors open for folks to follow.
And I would think that must have been an awfully isolating and solitary and scary experience. Not so much with Joe Papp, from what I know about him, but when this play about the Beatles, I read that as almost like a kind of slice of history.
Yeah.
Because of all the people that she's mentioning in this play, and this absolute obsession with Laurence Olivier, which I find very funny, because and the reason I find it so funny is because I'm sitting here in Madison, Wisconsin, and not far from here is a place called Genesee Depot. And there is 10 Chimneys, which used to be the home of Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontaine, the Lunts. And Laurence Olivier and Vivian Leigh used to go there all the time.
Wow.
They were hanging out.
Wow.
Can you believe this? These people, these famous people, they were very young at the time. They were going, and I'm talking about like in the 20s and 30s when you had to, take a train, and then, there were no buses or anything taking you up there. They were, climbing up hills, going into Genesee Depot. And I used to be a docent there, and it was amazing to me about, this famous person that some of us know, Laurence Olivier,
Right.
sleeping in this little bitty bedroom in Genesee. They
Right.
were doing all kinds of stuff. Noel Coward and all these people. I'm just saying. But she's moving around in these circles.
Right.
And so a lot of what I was thinking about as I was watching this, because it really is a story.
Yeah.
She's telling a story. The character is that, my goodness, look at the people that she's moving around, and she kept saying, "I'm overwhelmed. It's overwhelming." Well, yeah, it must have been. It must have been a very strange experience to be around all of these very famous white folks. As one of the few, it's probably the only with her son, a black person in this, and being able to negotiate and manage.
Right.
I didn't know from all of this study. I didn't know until this into this this event came up that that this was like real, and that she was actually really engaged with John Lennon and these folks.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right that here, for me, here's another great big slice of history that needs to connect with the diaspora, or however we define it, or Black theater. Because if you just look up some of the names of the people in the play, you got a whole a theater
Yes.
history lesson right
Yes.
there.
Yes. Yes. It's interesting. I was putting together the dramaturgy packet, and the name Ricky Houston, right?
Yeah.
She talked about her relationship with Ricky Houston. I kept saying, God, who's Ricky Houston? So I began to do my research a few months ago before the rehearsal. I was like, that's the mother of Angelica Houston.
Right.
And so forth. And her relationship. But also she mentions Diana Sands, right? We know her from.
And most people do not today know who Diana Sands was. And
What I
that's
thought was
really
interesting was, I mentioned this last week during my discussion with Adam, that I remember reading the play and I said, "Oh, there's a mistake here. There's a mistake here." Adrienne says in the play, Diana Sands was the original Sarah from Funny House of a Negro, and I said, "No, it was Billy Allen." I said, "That's a mistake." And then I did some research, and I said, "Oh, what we learn is that she did, the workshop, the early readings, the early presentations, and then Diana Sands gets this big role that she had to take.
The Owl and the Pussycat.
Yes, and she says, I got to move on for this production, but I really want to do it." And that's how Billy Allen comes in. And sort of gets the credit as being the first, Sarah in Funny House of a Negro. And then she talks about her relationship with James Baldwin. Very briefly.
Yeah, it just throws it in. Yeah.
And she says, and he tells me that as he's walking out the door to this party that I threw, think of me as your brother now. And I just imagined him saying that. I thought that was just marvelous and wonderful, I have another question for you both, but as we go on, I want to remind our audience that they can begin to submit their questions, and in a few minutes we'll open up for some Q&A with our audience. And so this question is for both of you, but I'm actually going to pull it directly from your book, Sandy. And so, in your work around contemporary Black women playwrights, particularly the anthology that you edited, you write in the critical introduction that with the exception of a few Black women playwrights, including Alice Childress, Lorraine Hansberry, and Ntozake Shange, that most African-American women playwrights by 1990 had not yet gained, significant notoriety. And then you go on to say, however, in 2002, playwright Susan Lloyd Parks becomes the first Black woman to win a Pulitzer Prize in drama, which was followed by Lynn Nottage, who won the prize in 2009 and again in 2017. And to add to that list, Katori Hall just won the Pulitzer Prize this year, the 2021 prize for drama for her play Hot Wing King. And let us not forget, you also mentioned that in the 2011-2012 theater season, 3 Black women saw their works produced on Broadway at the same time. Katori Hall's Mountaintop, Lydia Diamond's Stick Fly, and Susan Lloyd Parks' adaptation of Porgy and Bess. And so with that, I want to ask you both to, how would you evaluate the place and space of Black women playwrights today, thinking back on the contributions, thinking back on the the groundbreaking paths that they've forged. Where are we now today with Black women playwrights? Loaded question, I know.
LaDonna?
I'm happy to jump in. One of the things that you said a few minutes ago really stood out to me, and I'm going to circle back to the question, I promise, is this idea that Kennedy says that I'm a playwright, not a Black woman playwright. And as I thought about that, I could only speculate that there's a certain amount of negotiation that Black women playwrights have to do in order to get their works produced. And I would just have to make that assumption that that's a part of her careful negotiation to get her works produced. Yeah. You sometimes have to do that. And I know J.E. Franklin during the Black Art Movement, she chose, instead of going by her real name, Jenny Elizabeth Franklin, she went by a big J, little e, right? So that her identity wouldn't be known. And so this careful negotiation is ongoing right now. So I'm a little bit more of a doom and gloom type of person, a little bit more negative, okay?
Yeah.
So I see this whole We See You White American Theater. I know we're having these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but honestly, 3 Black women playwrights on Broadway, 3 or 4, is not enough. It's not enough. It's clearly, it's not enough. Like, this is a beginning place. So what I see, I love that we're talking about Broadway. That's fine. This is also like my soapbox, okay? Wonderful theater is happening off of Broadway. It happens all of the time. And that's where you see Black women playwrights, directors, designers doing incredible works. They're, most of the time, though, they have to found their own theater in order to see that happen. And they have been doing that. So it's sad that Broadway is just now seeing this, but Black women have been killing it for hundreds of years. Right. So I feel, though, I'm glad that there are more opportunities now, but it is not where it needs to be. And I worry that this might become a passing trend. Blackness has always been trendy, and I hate to be negative, but in order for us to really make real change happen, we need to see more representation on stage and behind stage as well.
Right.
We need to see Black women playwrights advocate for Black designers, right? We need to see Black designers advocate for, that chain reaction to happen in order for us to continue this conversation. And also, we need more funding for historically Black theaters. One of the things that often happens is you get this show, like for Colored Girls, that Woody King first produced, right? It's amazing. It's incredible. It has this like African aesthetic to it. It's gorgeous. It goes on Broadway, which is great, but it started off at his theater. And we need to make sure that we're continually funding these historically Black theaters so that they have longevity and that they stay around, because we see that wonderful artistic and creative things happening there. And Woody King is one of those people that looks for Black women playwrights, always have. And so, so that's, I hope it's not too doom on things, but I'm just a little weary that more work needs to be done. This is like not even, we're barely scratching the surface.
Let me say that I think that again, with what's happening with the how many 1, 2, 3, 4 Black women on Broadway, including Alice Childress, finally. It's still a moment, though. It's still a moment. And LaDonna, I share this kind of feeling since because we saw it in the 20s. Langston Hughes said when the Negro was in vogue, and then the 1960s. And then now, and because my question was, wait a minute, how is it that all of a sudden since May, we got all of these Black plays on Broadway? Well, they're coming from the nonprofit, according to that New York Times article. And that answered a lot of questions. So some of these plays, a couple of them are like the big budget ones, but that Chicken and Biscuits and not Clients and Passover are the 2 that are like in the millions, a couple of millions to get produced. But Thoughts of a Colored Man, that's by a Black person.
Which opens today, I believe.
One-man show too, right?
Lackawanna Blues is opening up.
Okay.
Though and Clyde, no, Clyde's by Lynn Nottage. She's got some good backing. But Chicken and Biscuits, Lackawanna Blues, and Thoughts of a Colored Man. I think these are the ones that are coming from the not profit. They're transferring from the not profit for-profit theaters,
Right.
and the timing is like right. It's like we can move these quickly. This is my point. We
Yeah.
don't have to raise tons of money to get these
Right.
on Broadway. But again, I reiterate what Dominique Morisseau said, and we have these 7 plays coming when we don't even have
What
audiences
is
yet
this? Yeah.
because
Mm,
of
Yeah.
the Delta virus is raging, and so we need to think about who's coming to the theater now.
Right.
They've got to urge the audiences back in. And these are plays, not musicals, right?
Right.
So I share your kind of
theater.
doom. Mine's not so doomy. It's more cautious
I
because
like
the other part is that we now have organizations that are helping to develop women.
Yeah.
The Women's Project, we have to mention that. In New York, I mean, they have been working with young upcoming playwrights for a long time, and then the other one is the Lark. And I forget what the acronym stands for, but that's one of the places where Tanya Barfield, for example,
Right.
developed her work, Blue Door. And some of the things I was looking for when I put this anthology together, I wanted all brand new plays, but there's some negotiation that has to happen with that. Um, and that is, the editor said, no, you've got to have some named people. Well, Susan Laurie Parks has been produced all, and published all over the place. Thank you, thank you. I have to thank Lynn Nottage because the agent was, giving me a little rough time about, how much it's going to cost, and I finally said I can't afford this, so I'm going to drop it. And the next thing I know, the agent called and said, Lynn Nottage wants to be in your anthology. Likewise with Katori Hall. And
Right.
so, and that's the
Right.
generosity, because they know that they're helping these younger playwrights. Another thing I'm so excited about, Christina Anderson. Now,
Yes.
yeah, I
Yes.
mean, her work is coming along, and she, if I'm not mistaken, wrote the book for Paradise Square, which is a play that my colleague is a dramaturg on. That's Tulani Davis,
Yes.
um, and
Yes.
that's
Yes.
going to be in Chicago,
Yes.
and then it's
Yes.
transferring to Broadway.
I'm
Yes.
gonna see it. Sorry,
You
I'm
know,
just
Uh,
excited. I can't
I
wait
want
to.
to mention, Dulani Davis is another pioneer in theater who traverses many terrains
oh
in
my
terms of
Lord, the
theater
woman's a
making,
genius.
producing, and scholarship. I just want to make sure we mention that. But I want to return to something you both are talking about in your answers here. And I think that what we're getting to is the idea of longevity
Hmm.
and sort of the seriousness of women playwrights, African American women playwrights, and then we can think about African American theater and theater in the margins at large. We can continue to stretch it out. But I think what's really important in the way in which we can see these works produced, um, um, continue to be produced in the future is that we continue to teach
Yeah.
these works and these playwrights because many of our students go on to be performers and artistic directors and producers. They are the ones who will remember plays and the people that they were introduced to in their classes.
Right.
I think back to Bell Hooks and her comment that the classroom remains the most radical
Yes.
place
It
for
is.
possibility. And I think that if we continue to teach their works, then what does that then the students are inspired and it also produce them on a college level and the students are
Mhm.
inspired. And for instance, I'll just give you an example. Here at Columbia College, where I'm at in Chicago, we had the Madeline Moore Burrell Playwriting Fellowship,
Mhm.
which was initiated by my colleague, Dawn Renee Jones,
Mhm.
who's a playwright and a
Mhm.
professor. And she was working at Columbia for a very long time. And she saw the need for our students to be introduced to women playwrights
Mhm.
and women playwrights of color and
Mhm.
Black women playwrights, in particular. And she saw the need for students to be introduced to playwrights who are writing today.
Mhm.
And she wanted the students to sort of be a part of that. And so she developed this fellowship at Columbia within our department. It's no longer around for a number of reasons, and probably that's because of the pandemic and things of that nature,
Yeah.
and things just shift. But what she was able to accomplish with the first two fellows, the first one was Christiana Ray Colon, right? A native of Chicago who is doing magnificent work. And she does this kind of theater, abolitionist theater, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where she develops these plays where she imagines a just and socially equitable world.
Oh.
And not just simply in this sort of fictive imaginative world where things are not real, but she says, what happens if we got rid of police officers and this idea of the carceral state? What would the world look like? And we controlled our own libraries, and we had community, buildings within communities that, that was a place of resources for people who were in need, and we controlled that. What would that look like? And then the second playwright was in San Anna. You're going to know her, Kelly Garrett.
Oh yeah,
Kelly Garrett.
Kelly.
She's in the book, right?
Yeah, that crazy play.
And Kelly, she was the second playwright, the second fellow, and they were teaching. And they were teaching about other women playwrights in addition to their own works. And I think that if we continue to teach these works and be serious about that, right, across the college campus, from an interdisciplinary perspective, then I think that is one of the ways in which we can begin to sort of shift the ways in which we are cautious about this moment. Because I agree with you both. I'm also cautious. Sometimes I'm optimistic. Sometimes I'm not. But I think one of the ways in which we can do that is, in short, is to teach these works. I mean, seriously teach the works of these women playwrights.
And that's one of the things I thought about as I was watching this play. Of course, I read it before I came to see it today. Scott asked a question, do you have a favorite Adrienne Kennedy play? Is there one that especially resonates with you? Funny House is always going to resonate with me, but also the movie star has to star in black and white.
Yeah.
And The Owl Answers, because I've seen that play. And a couple of things. And this play, that I could just call it the Beatles play, because it's such a slice of history.
Yeah.
And I feel that way about the movie star has to star in black and white. And it's very abstract, and so it's very, very, you really have to sit with it. And again, I'm asking students to, suspend their sense of disbelief and just allow the language of it to resonate with them, but I'll also have an opportunity to, put together a little list of these movie stars, these old-fashioned movie stars, that are in the play. So they get a little bit more of a history of the movie magic, so to speak. But also, what it says to me is that, folks, Black writers read other writers. They see. I mean, their intellectual horizon is very broad.
Yes.
It's not limited. And this is another example of it with the Beatles movie. There's a question from somebody's got a question from Marty. You got that?
This is from Marty. I'm looking at the time as well, so I'll make sure we get to some of our questions. This is from Marty, and Marty's actually playing Adrienne Kennedy in Mom, How Did You Meet the Beatles? So thank you, Marty, for joining us. And Marty says, I get comments regarding how my speech pattern is highfalutin when it is my actual speech with someone else's words. It begs the question, should we be producing plays with what seems to be ghetto fabulous speech? How do we combat certain assumptions on what white Americans see on stage?
Yeah. Go ahead, LaDonna.
Well, that question about Black English and just the different dialects that we have, that honestly hits home for me in a very real way. I think that we need to understand that Blackness has many different shapes and forms, and that we have different speech patterns, and that I think it becomes a problem when we start creating hierarchies surrounding it.
Yes.
And I think that it would be wonderful to see the works of, say, Sonia Sanchez, who really engages with Black English, and she uses a little I, and it's poetic and it's beautiful, right? There's a space for that, but there's also a space her Kennedy's works, or say PJ Gibson's work, where she specifically wanted to look at the Black middle class because she felt that that hasn't been explored nearly enough. She's writing at the same time as August Wilson. They're at the same workshops together, yet he rises to stardom and she does not. There's a long story behind that.
Yeah.
But I think that there's space that we need all kinds of representation, and this idea that a dialect means that you are somehow better than or lesser than is ridiculous. And I think that that's something that I would love to see just go away. Like, honestly, if we could make that go away, it would help so much, because all it does is it tears us apart as a community.
Yeah.
There is space for all of us.
Yeah.
So
And
those are my thoughts.
And specifically with this play, it's very elegant. You know, Adrienne Kennedy in my mind is very elegant.
Yes.
And so this Marty's presentation of Adrienne Kennedy is exactly how I imagine her. This is the way she would speak.
Yes. Yes.
You know, she's moving, and this is a very highly well-read woman, Adrienne Kennedy.
Yeah, and well-traveled.
And well-traveled, absolutely, in the 60s,
In
you
the
know.
60s, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and look at the people that she's moving around, you know. And so, yeah, this is the way she would speak. She's not coming up in there all ghetto fabulous, rolling her head and everything like that. And the show is elegant.
Yeah.
There's a sparseness to it. I don't want to give away stuff. Too much stuff, but it's elegant. Okay,
Yeah.
it's very simple. The staging is very simple.
It-
And so the language has to meet all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And thank you, Marty. You did a beautiful job. Wonderful.
Yes. Yes. You know, we are coming to the end of our session together, and I want to throw a fun question out there to you both. It was sort of phrased earlier, and I want to phrase it just a little differently, and that is this. In addition to Adrienne Kennedy, what's a Black play, or what's a play by a Black woman that you would encourage our audience to see a production of, or at least read a copy of the script?
I am a Susan Laurie Parks fan.
I was going to say Susan Laurie Parks too.
Venus is
Wow.
mine.
Okay.
Well, actually, I got two: Venus and the America play.
Okay.
But remember, I like this. You know, my kids won't even go to see theater with me anymore. You know, my daughters and they're grown, really grown up. It's like, Mom, don't go to see plays with Mama.
Right.
You know, just don't go. You know, Mom, Mom, when is this gonna end?
Right.
Oh, what does that mean?
So,
Okay.
but Donna, what would be? So, Sandra, we got your plays. Donna, what's your play?
Okay, mine. I don't know if I'm filtering out. It looks kind of like it on my screen, but
Yeah.
my choice would be Father Comes Home from the Wars, parts 1, 2, and 3. And I think, just like Sandy, one of the things that she's been saying throughout this conversation is just how rich and complex Black women writers, what they bring to the table in terms of bringing in our history and our culture and layering it and weaving it and making this beautiful tapestry. And I feel like Father Comes Home from the Wars, parts 1, 2, and 3 does that. And it's also funny as well. And so that is the play that I will be teaching in my introduction to theater class, because I want students to take a deep dive.
Yeah. Okay, I got some more. Okay, because I'm a Detroit person, I got to throw this out. Okay, Dominique Morisseau's Skeleton Crew. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Marty, for a wonderful performance. Now we're back into realism, but I'm thinking about a project where I pair that one with Sweat. No, is it Sweat? No, no, it's the Lynn Nottage play where the people in Reading.
That's Sweat. That's Sweat.
Yeah, okay, yeah, those two, yeah.
I actually teach Sweat often, and in fact, I just signed on to serve as a dramaturg for Paramount Theater's upcoming production of Sweat out in Aurora, Illinois. I'm really, really excited about this. It's actually one of my favorite plays. So Sweat, if I had to answer this question, I think Sweat would be one of them by Lynn Nottage. I would also say P-Valley by Katori Hall. Trouble in Mind by Alice Church.
Yeah.
I saw a production of Trouble in Mind a few years ago, back when I was in graduate school in Kentucky. In fact, I was with Dr. Jackson, and I was his TA, and we took a group of undergraduate students, and I was blown away by that production. So I would name that. We have one last question as we come upon the hour, and I'm going to throw this out there to us and give us each a minute to consider this question. And this question is, looking at how Black women have shaped American theater, do you have any advice on how young playwrights can continue to move American theater forward? What would you hope to see in the artists in the next 5 to 10 years?
I want to just simply say I want to see commitment to the work, and by that I mean the craft,
Mm.
and just a deep dive to learn theater history, to learn Black
Yes,
theater history. That's what I want to see them, not just jump up. I got to play, and I'm up
Mhm.
here doing this, and you don't know what happened before.
yes,
Uh, that's my thing. Commitment to the craft of
yes,
playwriting. Yeah,
yes.
and then bringing other people along with you.
Right,
Absolutely.
right.
There, I think that's so important to lift as you climb. I think that would be
Madonna.
my pieces of advice. That and to read everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you both. I would also add, and really, I just want to sort of affirm with what Sandy just said, and that is to learn theater history. I often hear moments where we are celebrating directors and designers and performers today and playwrights today, particularly Black women or Black in general. Designers and directors and performers and so forth and playwrights. And I always say, gosh, this is really, really wonderful. But there's a genealogy in which these folks emerge. So for instance, thinking about Black women directors, I think about my own, my own work looks at Glenda Dickerson, a
Yes, yes,
pioneer.
yes,
I think about Vinette Carroll. I
yes.
think about, I even think about some folks on a local level, Frida Scott Giles, who I think
Right.
we all know, who's a pioneer in her own right. I'm thinking about, gosh, you all help me here. She's the cousin of Lorraine Hansberry, director.
Chanel Perry.
Yeah, Chanel Perry, right? I mean, those folks. I even think about in moving forward, think about playwrights. I think about Anna Devere Smith as well, who I think we may know who she is, but a lot of our students today are just unaware who she is, and she is a pioneer in theater, American theater, but even in the context of form in terms of documentary theater and so forth. And that would be my hope, that we continue to learn our theater history, and so that we can continue to expand our knowledge while we move the field forward. Yeah.
And there are a
Amen.
couple of other things that are happening. If you look at New Federal Theater, I mean, they've opened up writing classes. They might have had them all the time, and that's another part of it.
Yes.
Supporting the Black theater companies that
Yes.
exist.
Yes, in all of the cities. I'm actually currently working on a piece right now about the Atlanta Black Theater Festival, and I do an interview with Tony Henson, and I write this critical introduction. It's for an upcoming project, a book. It's a chapter in the book Cities in the Performance, edited by John Green, and I talk about how women were the shapers of American theater within academic institutions, and
They
also
were.
at a theater institution, and more specifically where theater festivals were training grounds, right? But we have to, as you're saying, Sandy, we have to continue to support, with funding and other forms of resources so that we can continue to train these artists of the future. Yes. Friends, we are at the hour. And this
Wow.
was fun. Thank
Thank you
you
so
both.
much.
Yes, I
Thank
want
you.
to thank you both, Dr. LaDonna Forsgren and Dr. Sandra Adell. My name is Khalid Long. Get your tickets, run, and see Mom, How Did You Meet the Beatles by Adrienne Kennedy and Adam Kennedy. And I'll see you all on Monday for our next discussion. Thank you all, and have a great night.
Take care. Thank you. Bye bye, everybody.